Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came here to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. Now, this video is once again for my newer, casual boxing fans. I'm trying to deliver some clarity to the newer boxing fans that they're coming into the sport and there's things they don't understand. So in this video right here, we're gonna tackle why is boxing so disorganized and why is boxing so corrupt? Because a lot of people who watch this sport casually or don't watch it normally don't understand why boxing is this way. So I'm going to do my best to explain why things are the way they are. Now, in sports, Major League sports, professional sports, basketball, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, the Premier League, in these sports, all these sports are just one big global entity. They have unions in place for the players that protect the athletes. They have a monopoly on the sport as the biggest entity in the sport, so that there's really no competition to get in their way. And boxing is not like that. There's no one company in boxing that just has a stranglehold on boxing. Boxing is probably the only sport in all of sports that you can say is a sport of true free enterprise. And what I mean when I say that is it's a sport where you get to maneuver as you see fit and you get to dictate how your career wants to go. Just so long as you can win and get into a certain position in boxing. If you can't win the big fights and if you can't put yourself in a position of power and those places of strength to call the shots, then you really can't dictate much. You're going to be the opponent. But if you can win, you can dictate as you see fit, because like I said, it's a sport of free enterprise. Now, with that being said, matchroom boxing, these are, for those of you who don't know about these companies, these are the biggest companies in boxing. Matchroom Boxing, which is a primarily British company, Top Rank Boxing, which is the biggest company in boxing, and Premier Boxing Champions, which is also another big company, and Golden Boy Promotions, another big company. None of these companies in boxing control the sport. Think of boxing and think of the structure of boxing like a piece of pie. Think of it like your favorite pumpkin pie that you get in Publix, or a blueberry pie, or whatever your favorite pie is. Just think of boxing as that pie, and imagine that pie is cut up into about 5 pieces. Okay, 5 pieces. All right, one piece is matchroom boxing. Another piece is Top Rank Boxing. Another piece is Golden Boy Promotions. And another piece is Premier Boxing Champions, and then the fifth piece and the smallest piece is just all the other smaller promoters in boxing, local promoters, things like that. That's pretty much how boxing is. It's pretty much a pie. It's pretty much a pie, and every promoter has a piece of the pie. You see what I'm saying? And with every promoter, they have different agendas. They have different things they're trying to accomplish in building up their fighters. So because of that, there becomes a lot of conflict and a lot of difficulties at times to make the big fights happen. And a lot of times the boxing fans don't get the fights exactly when they want to see them. You see what I'm saying? Now that's one side of the coin as to why boxing is disorganized. But that's probably the most important thing you need to understand is boxing is a pie. It's divided up into about 5 parts from the promotional standpoint, and everybody has their hand in the pie, and everybody has their own agendas and things they're trying to accomplish for their fighters and with their fighters. Okay, so that's one part. The second part is the sanctioning bodies. Now, for those of you who don't know what a sanctioning body is, a sanctioning body is the organization that has the world title belts. You see what I'm saying? So in the boxing world, we have the World Boxing Council, otherwise known as the WBC. We have the International Boxing Federation, otherwise known as the IBF. We have the World Boxing Association, known as the WBA, and we have the World Boxing Organization as the WBO. These are the 4 major world titles you can win in boxing. When you've won one of these world titles, you're in a position to make some good money for yourself as a fighter. You're in a position to push forward and really make some things happen for your career, because then you can leverage that into big fights on television, whether it be on ESPN or Sky Sports, or depending on where you're fighting. You can leverage that into big TV fights, and you can leverage. And the longer you hold that belt, the more opportunities you'll get, and the more recognized you are as a fighter. So where the confusion and the corruption comes from the sanctioning bodies is the fact that when you fight for one of these world titles, it costs money just to fight for a world title. Most people who are casual fans won't know this. They think it's just free to fight for a world title, but no. These sanctioning bodies have a certain amount of money you must pay just to fight for one of the world titles. So I've read sometimes that like the most popular and most sought after belt in boxing is the World Boxing Council title belt, which is the WBC title. It's a green belt. It looks pretty cool. In fact, I'll show you what it looks like. If you don't know what it is, if you're a new boxing fan, you don't know what it is. It looks something like that. The WBC title looks really similar to something like that. It's a pretty cool looking belt, right? It's green. It's got gold. It's definitely distinct. So fighters want to win that title. It's a very sought after belt in boxing. And I've read in a couple articles and over the years that sometimes the sanctioning fee, the amount that it costs to fight for this title on a given night, can cost a fighter upwards of $250,000. And sometimes when a fighter fights in what they call a unification fight is when more than one of the four major belts is involved in a fight. So you might get a guy who has the World Boxing Council title belt versus a guy with the International Boxing Federation belt, WBC and IBF champion, and these fighters got to pay sanctioning fees for both these belts. So if a fighter wants to be what they call an undisputed champion in boxing, to have all the belts, which is great to say because it doesn't happen often, it's going to cost you money just to fight for the undisputed championship. So think of it like this: if all four title belts are $250,000 for the sanctioning fee, you do the math. That's $1 million for a sanctioning fee, and depending on what the fighter gets paid after taxes, that sanctioning fee could eat up a lot of his check. So sometimes, believe it or not, even though it's a noble thing for fighters to want to fight for the world title belts, because you should want the world titles to be called a champion. Sometimes I've heard fighters say this personally, just interviewing them and going to boxing gyms. Sometimes these fighters don't want to fight for these world title belts because it costs them a lot of money. So a lot of these fighters got kids, they got families to feed, and no disrespect to these world titles, but when their career is done, if they're brain damaged and their bills start piling up, you can't pay for the bills with the WBC title. So a lot of times these fighters find it to be a more prudent way to go about their business by not becoming the undisputed champion, because that would actually cost them more money, and they'll actually wind up saving money by not becoming the undisputed champion, even if they have the chance not to. You see what I'm saying? So it's crazy to say, but these are just the realities of boxing. Now there are exceptions to the rule. In boxing we had a scenario a couple of years ago in the heavyweight division, because the heavyweight division is where the biggest money is at. It's the biggest, most popular division in boxing. In the heavyweight division, we had two fighters, Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, and Anthony Joshua's team made Deontay Wilder's team an offer to fight for the undisputed. Deontay Wilder had that WBC belt we're talking about. Anthony Joshua had the WBA and the IBF and the WBO belts. He had all those belts. And they had a chance to fight for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. And for those of you who don't know, there hasn't been an undisputed heavyweight champion since 1999 when the great Lennox Lewis did it. So it's been a long time. It would have been the first time in 20+ years that we would have saw an undisputed champion. And Wilder turned down a $100 million offer not to fight him because he felt like he could get more if he kept winning. And he lost to Tyson Fury recently, and he's never going to see that money again. So there are exceptions to the rule, but in most cases, when it comes to boxing, sometimes fighters don't want to jump right into a unification fight or an undisputed fight, because guess what? Even though it's a noble thing, financially sometimes it just doesn't make sense for them. And in boxing, there's only a short amount of time to make your money, and you got to be very smart and very prudent with how you go about your business, because when it's over, and you can't come back. And if you do decide to come back, like guys like in the past, like a guy like Joe Louis when he was broke and he came back, it's not going to end well for you. So once you get out, you don't want to come back, because boxing is a brutal sport and it is to be taken very seriously, because every time you go in there, you're putting your life on the line. So we've established that boxing is a sport of free enterprise. We've established the part with the sanctioning fees and how that gets in the way sometimes. And then my last and final point is that unlike like in the NBA and the MLB, two of the biggest, most popular leagues here in America for sports, baseball and basketball, they the athletes, the players for these leagues, they have a union. They have what they call a players association, and this is a group, this is an organization that is for the players, and it's by the players as well, and it's a union basically that protects the rights of the players. The players, if the MLB or the NBA pulls any sort of foolishness in terms of the pay scale or rules, the players, because of this union, have the right to fight against that, and they can go on strike. And we've seen that a couple times in American sports. In 1994 in the MLB, there was a big strike for the players. And in 2012, or no, 2000 was it 2012? 2012, 2013, the NBA had a lockout. And they missed the first 2.5 months of the season because the players didn't agree with some of the financial structure that was going on in the NBA. They felt like the players should be able to dictate more and get more money, and they didn't play until they came to an agreement. Well, in boxing, you don't really have anything like that. You don't have anything for the fighters, which is absolutely crazy, because you would think in a sport as dangerous as boxing, with so many health risks as boxing, that you would have this, but you don't. So because of that, because there's no union or like association to protect the fighters or fight against the some of the corruption that goes on in boxing, because of that, a lot of times the promoters take advantage of the fighters. They take advantage of them. Not all promoters, but some. They take advantage of the fighters, and it's just part of the sport. It's part of the sport, and there's no oversight. There's no oversight in boxing, so there's nobody to say you can't do that. There's no association or organization to say that you can't do that like there is in the other sports. So because of that, you wind up seeing a lot of what I like to call open corruption in boxing. It's blatant corruption in boxing. And some people want to demean boxing as a sport for this, but corruption's always been part of boxing, going all the way back to the Italian mob days when you had the likes of Frankie Carbo and guys like that. So it's always been part of the sport, and sports have always been corrupt. And people say boxing is so corrupt, but I would venture to say that at least boxing's open about it, and if you watch the sport long enough, you'll pick up on certain things. So you can't really be as mad at it after a while. The NBA, on the other hand, like basketball, you can be watching the NBA Finals, or the NBA Western Conference Finals, and you could be thinking that you're watching the most fair competition in the world because you wouldn't even think of corruption or anything like that. But then the years later, you find out that Tim Donaghy, the referee, was intentionally calling fouls on the Sacramento Kings to ensure that Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and the Los Angeles Lakers would advance to the NBA Finals, because the Lakers are more popular than the Sacramento Kings worldwide, and it's in the NBA's best business interest that the Lakers go to the finals and win, as opposed to the Sacramento Kings. So at least with boxing, I've always said, look, at least with boxing, it's open, it's in your face, and you can kind of anticipate these things. Doesn't mean we can't get mad at these things. Doesn't mean we can't call them out, but we can actually anticipate them. As to where in other sports, you hear a lot of corruption. Same thing in like soccer or world football. How many times have we heard about UEFA being corrupt and intentionally calling fouls for Barcelona in the favor of Barcelona, calling penalties in favor of Barcelona so that they can win and advance further in the Champions League and go on to win the Champions League. We've heard all these things. So boxing is disorganized. The structure of boxing is to be criticized, and it really does need to, hopefully one day it can be fixed or tightened up a bit to look out for the best interests of the fighters. But it is a sport of free enterprise, and fighters have to look out for their overall well-being, because there's nobody looking out for their overall well-being within the sport. Everybody's just thinking about themselves. It's a sport of free enterprise. And these are the realities of boxing. So I hope you came away from this video and you learned something. I hope you understand more about the structure of boxing and just how it works. And let me know what you guys think about some of the things I said in my video. Let me know in the comments. I'll definitely be reading them. Make sure you take the time to subscribe. Like I say in every single one of these videos, you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just a kid from Daniels. Until next time, take care, guys.